PD software. PD software. What exactly is PD software?
PD software is the administration software used by the local police department. This includes database software, reception desk interfaces, and identifit programs.
No, of course it bloody doesn't. PD software, as I'm sure you know, stands for public domain software. It was pretty prolific in the 80s and early 90s, and indeed was the source of a lot of my software collection. It was cheap, it was cheerful, and best of all, it was in abundance. The actual meaning of public domain software is an entirely literal one, in the sense that it's any software which has been placed into the hands of public ownership. A bit like nationalisation, but without the self-serving, weaselly government to overlook it. PD software has no copyright and no trademarking, meaning that there's no real restrictions with what you can do with the software, even though ironically a lot of PD discs contained images and content which were copyrighted and ripped from all over the place. But you were able to mod, copy, destroy or repurpose the software until your heart's content. However, it should be noted that under the Berne Convention for the Protection of Literary and Artistic Work, which has been in place since 1886 originating in Switzerland, authors automatically retain exclusive copyright to anything they have written, so an author technically has to proactively disclaim their copyright for it to be fully public. I tend to look at PD software as being pre-internet internet, in that you could find an absolute wealth of software, graphics, music and games, all for pretty much the cost of a floppy disk. Computing magazines were awash with adverts listing tons of options, all in the smallest print possible, so that you had no choice but to be overwhelmed by the options available. Not to mention that the cover discs of these magazines were usually packed full of several PD utilities or games as well. It was public domain heaven. The growth of this type of software was typically from bedroom coders, hackers and general hobbyists who just wanted to get their name or their creativity out there. Much like I'm doing with this YouTube video, it was sharing your work with a wider audience, usually for the complete love of it. Like the internet now, where people put up their creative works for download or perusal, sharing your software with public domain houses for distribution, or submitting it to magazines for their cover disc content was the quickest and easiest way for reaching a wide audience. A common first order to put through the PD software houses was to order their catalogue disc. This golden disc contained a list of the entire software library that the company held. So rather than looking through the back pages of monthly computer magazines over and over, you could flick through this list and find whatever you wanted. Some of the bigger libraries even incorporated advanced features such as search and even images if you were lucky, and they'd fit on a single density disc. As PD grew, many people started up their own PD libraries and placed small ads in magazines and local publications, turning the entire scene into a somewhat competitive business. As CD-ROMs emerged on the scene, this became much easier, with suppliers offering thousands of programs on one CD for the cost of, say, a regular full-priced game. If you wanted to start your own library, you just needed to get one of these CDs, a stack of floppies, and an advert to get you started. As the mid-90s drew nearer, PD software became more and more abundant. Popular magazines like ST format and Amiga format started running exclusive PD sections of their magazines, and the software became a showground for the best hackers to show off their graphical sound and demos. This route led to many of the lads and ladies moving to a mainstream software industry, working for houses such as EA and Microprose. In terms of platform, public domain was huge on home computer formats such as the Amiga and Atari ST models. It was and remains clearly available on PCs and Macs, but it just didn't seem like a big thing in the early 90s as it did on the AA machines. Instead, what were more commonly seen was software under the freeware or shareware licenses, which although seemed similar, they held different restrictions. Initially, the freeware term was used in the 1980s for programs released without source code. However, generally freeware software is available for no monetary cost, but may have restrictions such as prohibited redistribution or limitations of use. Source code is usually protected from sharing or modification as opposed to public domain software. The term freeware was originally coined by Andrew Flugelman when he wanted to sell his PC Talk application in 1982. He didn't appreciate the standard commercial distribution channels, so used a free distribution approach with a view that users could contribute if they felt obliged to. This moniker was shortly after named shareware, and often used to distribute limited variations of software, such as the Doom demo, or cut down versions of applications, or just software with the familiar nag message that asked users to contribute towards their software if they found it useful. Public domain software is now more commonly referred to as free software, with an extension being the open source software, where source code is readily available and can be usually contributed to by other developers who wish to enhance its capabilities. An obvious example of this is the Mozilla Firefox browser. It should be noted that if the actual source is in the public domain for distribution, it's possible to become non-copylefted free software, which means that some copies or modified versions may no longer be free, and instead distributed under a different license. A bit like, yeah, thanks for the code, I'll slap my name on it, change the colours, and resell it. Which brings us on to my personal collection of public domain software, which spans several formats and several years. My collection has somewhat eroded over the years with the sale of various machines, but let's take a look at this bizarre world, which I amassed sometime between the early and mid-1990s. PD libraries often distributed shareware, freeware and public domain software all from one central library, and with such a vast amount of software, images and music, quality varied dramatically, just as it does now with internet sites and digital downloads. For some pieces of software, the most pleasant part was the installation process, with the rest of the game resembling a barely playable school project, such as this top-down racing game which defaults to 2 computer players on initial load, leaving you just to watch the action rather than participate. Once you actually change the configuration to get to play the game, you quickly understand the reason behind this. Other software was just so bug-ridden or unfinished that it was barely playable. It's clear that a lot of it was people just testing out their programming skills or simply trying to make a quick buck from those crazy enough to get hold of the full versions, if indeed they actually existed. Of course, there were some absolute gems amongst the turds, but they're the ones you're most likely to have heard of. And it wasn't all software, there were tons of Windows themes, sounds, images, or configuration utilities which you used at your own peril. Apart from the massive cover discs I seem to have collected, these clips pretty much show my remaining PC PD collection, or at least the discs that still work. So, with haste, let's move on to the Atari ST and see if quality improves.
First up, a disc that says Star Trek.jpg I've written on it, and A11. Whoa, nice graphics. Here we have another Atari demo disc, my favourite of the demo discs. Boink, Flying Bird and Waterfall. You should just play it and leave it on in the background. Mental. So, boink. Is it better than the Amiga? That is the question. Whoa, look at that. That used to always impress me. Look at that. Desk accessories, Neochrome and Neofun and Megaroids. Speech. We have a speech synthesis program.
Hello. How are you? Boys. Atari ST Plus. Fuck the Amiga. Actually, I like Amigas. Fuck. Glad.
So childish. I love it. This disc is labelled emulators. There we go. A Sinclair ZX81 emulator. Panic! Oh, no, it's closed it. Go. What looks like a 3D Vision ZX81. Outrun and various other programs. Ooh, let's have 256 stars, please. This is a very noisy area of space. Okay. Satellite pictures. It's just a collection of satellite pictures, but I used to think this stuff was so cool. It is, especially on the Atari. Just blew my mind. Music demonstration. Pinball game. They look like the deaths from Gauntlet. Whoa, this is rapid.
So there we have it, a sample of my Atari ST PD collection. Apparently I liked demonstrations. I think in a way I used to find it quite soothing having them playing in the background. But there was also an element of getting as much out of the system as possible. I knew it couldn't do everything a PC could, but I damn well wanted to push it to its limits and see it with my own eyes. There was just something captivating about that, and PD software was a huge playground for that type of thing, and the starting point for many of the best developers today. So, after all that, it seems appropriate to leave you with my favourite Atari ST demonstration, depicting the advantages of the machine over its competitors. You can argue amongst yourselves about that. Thanks for watching this investigation into public domain software, and good night.
Ah, the 3 bombs! My favourite of all the crashing screens.